Wow, Cindy, that's gorgeous. Is that a Michael Gott too?
No,
The first one is.
that's Andrea Menard,
Oh.
and it was nominated for a Posse this year.
Yeah, this is new music coming out of Unity, and the Posse music that Sandy was telling us about, both of these is just wonderful. I love it. And it had special meaning for us, didn't it, Sparkle? Yeah. So, sorry for the confusion on the principles. I was inspired to rewrite those, and it came like a download, and I said, oh, well, we'll just have to deal with it, because I had already printed them. Okay, I got to tell you a story today. Once upon a time, nearly 2,000 years ago, in the small town of Bethany in Judea, two women sent an urgent message to their dear friend Jesus to come quickly, as their brother Lazarus was very ill. They knew how much Jesus loved Lazarus and were certain he would rush to their side. But Jesus did not arrive for nearly a week. And by the time he did, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. At Lazarus' tomb, Jesus found his beloved friends, Martha and Mary, and a crowd of mourners weeping and wailing. He walked to the entrance of the tomb and commanded, "Roll the stone away." "Lord," Martha said, "haven't you heard? Lazarus has been dead for days. The smell will be terrible." But Jesus replied, "As I have often told you, you will see God's glory if you believe." So they did as they were told and rolled back the stone, and Jesus, after saying a prayer of thanksgiving, called out with authority, "Lazarus, come forth." Immediately, Lazarus came out of the tomb, still tightly wrapped in the traditional grave clothes, and Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." And so they did, and Lazarus walked among them once more. Now all the people at the tomb were amazed and ran off to tell everyone they knew about what had happened. Some went directly to the temple priests, those Pharisees, and told them what Jesus had done. So the temple high council met to discuss the situation. "What are we going to do?" they asked each other. "When the people hear about Lazarus, this Jesus is going to become even more popular and more powerful than he already is. We must do something about him before the whole nation turns away from us and follows him. For if we lose control of the people because of this man, all our agreements with the Romans will be null and void, and the army will surely descend on us and take over the city and perhaps even destroy us all." One of the high priests, Caiaphas, said, "We can't be stupid. We can't allow our whole nation to be destroyed. We're going to have to sacrifice this one man to save the many." And thus the stage and the political justification for Jesus' execution was established. So from that time on, the Jewish leaders began to plot Jesus' death in earnest. Knowing this, Jesus withdrew to the village of Ephraim near the wilderness and stayed there with his disciples. But since it was almost time for the Passover, many Jews from the countryside were in Jerusalem, and there was lots of gossip about the miracle Jesus had performed with Lazarus. Now he was truly a celebrity. The people wondered whether he would be coming to Jerusalem for Passover and how they were going to catch a glimpse of him if he did so. Meanwhile, the leading priests had told everyone, "If you see this Jesus, you must let us know so that we can question him about this so-called miracle." And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, not a whole lot has changed. Anyway. Now the disciples had heard all the gossip, and they were very afraid for Jesus. They knew how threatened the Pharisees were by his power and his popularity, and so they urged him to stay in hiding. But instead, Jesus told his disciples exactly what was going to happen to him in the coming week. He told them it was his destiny, that he had come to make clear to everyone the power of God to overcome anything, even death. But despite having seen Lazarus walk out of that tomb, the disciples were distraught. They cried and they begged, but in the end, when Jesus set out for Jerusalem, they followed him. Now, a full day before he arrived, the news that he was on his way to Jerusalem swept through the city. The excitement was palpable. It was a buzz. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of town, Jesus sent the disciples to get a small donkey, and on this donkey he rode humbly into town. Throngs of people ran out to meet him. They lined the road, waving palm branches and laying them before him and crying out, "Praise God, praise and bless the one who comes in the name of the Lord. All hail to the King of Israel." Now, how do you think the Pharisees were feeling? They were sullenly watching from the sidelines and muttering to one another and saying, "Look at that. The whole world is at his feet." Now, Jesus, who was very aware of the danger all around him, did not show fear. Far from it. Instead, he rode that donkey straight into the middle of town. In fact, he rode it straight into the temple courtyard. And far from keeping a low profile, he decided it would be a good idea to drive all the money changers and merchants out of the temple. The Pharisees seethed with anger. Jesus sat down in the temple then and began to teach the people. The people that gathered around him were his inner circle, the spiritual ones, the ones longing for growth, the ones longing for a new law. Yet even these, he could tell, as he told them of all the signs and wonders that God had performed through him, even these were beginning to doubt him. And many of those who still believed wouldn't admit it because they were afraid of the Pharisees. They were afraid they'd be driven out of the temple. And so Jesus went away to an attic room to prepare himself for what was coming. For he knew his hour was at hand, the hour when he would leave this world and return to the Father. The story of that first Palm Sunday is one of the most powerful and multifaceted in the scripture. There are so many lessons within it, but this morning I want to focus on 3 points that really stand out for me. 1, live your mission. 2, expect opposition. And 3, trust the process. Jesus knew who he was. On the day he rode into Jerusalem, he was surrounded by people of every political persuasion, each of whom insisted on washing him with the full gamut of their opinions and their feelings. Everything from adoration to murderous rage fell upon him within minutes. And Jesus bought into none of it. He moved through all this public opinion without being distracted or deterred in the slightest from his mission. He did not encourage those who would adore him. He did not want them to make him a guru or king. He rode on that donkey to remind them that he was just a human being, one among them. Over and over during his ministry, he had told the people not to worship him, but to hear his message. You see, to me, the thing is that Jesus' ego was healed. His spirit was whole. He could not be pulled off center by the adoration of the crowd or seduced by praise. Nor could he be driven back by those who criticized and threatened him. This didn't mean that he did not feel fear. It was just that he could not be controlled by fear and threats. Jesus was a man focused on his mission. So the opinions of others, either positive or negative, meant little to him. He illustrated for us something we all need to understand deep down in our souls. That the very same people who adored him on Palm Sunday would yell, "Crucify him," a few days later. Those hero worshipers and curiosity seekers who were attracted to him because of his miracles would be loyal only as long as Jesus looked like a hero to them. When he was arrested and stood before Pilate, stripped and crowned with thorns, beaten and bloody, they instantly deserted him. Choose your friends carefully. The story of Holy Week illustrates how fickle the world is. If we need others to validate our worth, if we live for the approval of anyone, we are sure to suffer great disappointment and disillusionment. Jesus, to me, is the perfect example of what it means to live, not for the praise of others, but for the purpose of fulfilling our mission in life. The second major lesson I get from the Palm Sunday story is that when we take a stand for our purpose, for living the truth that we are, we can expect opposition. Anyone who challenges the existing power structure, be it a political system or a family dynamic, anyone who takes a road less traveled, anyone who thinks out of the box, should not be surprised to be challenged, if not downright persecuted. Albert Einstein once said, "Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." What I think he meant by mediocre minds are those who not only cannot see another point of view, but who cannot honor another person's right to hold a different point of view. History, our own personal history, and that of nations, is filled with examples of great spirits who were persecuted, some even executed, by those who feared their power. People who dare to live outside societal norms or challenge the status quo are essential catalysts for change, and they are also lightning rods. Some of us in Unity who have parted ways with the religions of our families and friends know what it feels like to be criticized, even shunned for not conforming. Through the events of Holy Week, Jesus shows us that this has always been the case. We are not unique. And through his example, we see for perhaps the first time the power of passive resistance. I don't think any image has ever moved me more, still does, than that of Jesus standing in his dignity before Pilate. Neither stripping, nor beating, nor insults could cause him to lose his center. He did not try to convince anyone of anything. He did not defend or deny. Pilate, confused by his calm, asked him, "Don't you know that I have the power to crucify you?" To which Jesus quietly replied, "You would have no power over me at all unless it was given to you from above." This is a huge lesson for us. No human being has power over our spirit. They may have the power to take our physical life. We may allow authority over our behavior for a reason, like keeping safe or because it's in the best interest of society to do so. But no one has power over our spirit unless we give it to them. Not our parents, or our spouses, or our bosses, or our children, or our friends. How different life would be if we could fully integrate this idea. Many years ago, before ever hearing about Unity, I was working in the corporate world. and I was struggling to balance my role as the single mother of 3 and a responsible employee. At some point, I decided to take a stand for a woman's right to have paid time off to stay home with a sick child. This was not a popular view in the 1970s, especially in that intense downtown DC sales office of IBM where I worked. And I had several very heated conversations with management about it. I guess you could call them conversations. Well, it so happened that one of the toughest of these arguments took place during Holy Week. At church that Good Friday, the story of Jesus before Pilate was read. Of course, I had heard it many times before, but this time I was stunned. It seemed so completely relevant. I had been pouring emotion and energy into the struggle for women's rights. I was exhausted and yet had made very little progress. It seemed that the harder I pushed, the more resistance came back. Since then, when I find myself fighting hard for something or needing to defend myself, that picture of Jesus standing silent before Pilate serves as a touchstone for reclaiming my spirit. Jesus teaches us that when we know who we are, when we know what we stand for, and have said all that needs to be said, the most powerful thing we can do is stand quietly in our truth and let the outcome be what it will be. Knowing that divine order is present and active, we let go and let God. Which brings me to the third lesson: trust the process. Now, I was thinking that this is a bit harder for us than it was for Jesus. By the time of his entry into Jerusalem, he had evolved to a point where he had accepted his future. He knew the outcome. He fully understood his purpose, and he was totally clear about his oneness with the power of God. Most of us do not always have that level of certainty and clarity yet. When we are walking our road less traveled, we are much of the time so far into the trees that we cannot even imagine what the whole forest looks like. So all we can do is pray for guidance, trust the wisdom of our hearts, and take one courageous, faith-filled step after another. But when the going gets tough, I don't know about you, but we might begin to agonize over whether we are headed in the right direction. We may even begin to doubt ourselves or our intentions. But Jesus teaches us that this is the very time to hang in there. That this is the time to believe in ourselves and trust the unfolding process of our lives. You know, Jesus had moved steadily toward his destiny his whole life. For 30 years, he prepared, and when the time was right, stepped into his ministry. And during that ministry, he didn't run away when things were hard, nor did he waste a lot of time arguing and convincing or trying to force things to be the way he thought they should be. Moving steadily through each divinely led phase in his life, he grew in spiritual power until in the end, he was ready and able to quietly and courageously take the final steps in the fulfillment of his mission on earth. All in perfect order, nothing wrong, nothing wasted, nothing missing. Some of you might remember this movie called Willow. You know I got to get a movie in here somewhere. So Willow lived in a medieval town many, many years ago, and he wanted to apprentice with a shaman. And the shaman devised a test to find out if he was ready. And so he held out his hand and he asked Willow, "In which finger does the power lie?" And Willow hesitated, and then he picked a finger, and the wizard slowly shook his head and Willow was rejected. And so, though disappointed, he goes out and he lives a life of adventure and romance. He joins the army and lives through a war, and over the course of a decade has many fascinating encounters. In the process, he grows in wisdom and maturity. When he finally returns to the village, he again meets the shaman. And the shaman asks him, having noticed that he seemed different, he said, "Would you like to take the test again?" And Willow said yes, he would. So he held out his hand and he said, "In which finger does the power lie?" And Willow said, "In neither, in none of them. The power lies in me." And the shaman said, "Correct. But you know," he said, "I thought you knew that answer before. Why did you not say it?" And Willow replied, "I thought I knew, but I guess I didn't trust myself enough to say it." That sure sounds like something I've experienced. Seeing the way forward, knowing the right thing to do or say, and then backing off or keeping silent, afraid of being wrong or of being judged. Jesus didn't back off, and he didn't quit. And when fear and doubt threatened to derail him, he went into the garden to pray. And there he dug down deep within himself and found the faith and the courage to go forward. It was the Buddha who said, "If you don't find your courage within yourself, where will you find it?" Good question. Good question. So these 3 powerful Palm Sunday lessons from Jesus. Live your mission. Expect opposition and trust the process. In other words, know who you are and why you're here. No one can figure that out for any of us because no one else knows the call that has been placed on our hearts. And don't be discouraged or deterred when people oppose you. They just simply do not understand. And finally, trust the process. Trust divine order and divine timing, even when you can't see the forest for the trees. And you know, it really doesn't matter to me whether the biblical account of that first Palm Sunday is literal historical fact or allegorical story. The lessons are as practical and powerful today as they were 2 millennia ago. Like Jesus, you and I have come here with a purpose and everything we need to live it. So as we go forward into Holy Week, I offer you the advice of 14th century mystic Meister Eckhart. Our life work is to become aware of what is in us and then announce it, pronounce it, produce it, and give birth to it. Who could possibly be a better example than Jesus? God bless you all. Thank you.